Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Let me flip over here. Nice to see everybody. Thanks for joining me. I no longer have to ask if things are working. I can see on my phone if they're working. I'm getting very fancy with this type of thing. But say hi if you're here. I see some familiar faces. Paul, nice to see you. I know you couldn't make it last week. It has been a week already around here. I want to start with some good news. I thought, as I mentioned last week, kind of start with some celebration. So if you have something to celebrate, put it in the chat. Somebody last week became AWS Certified, which is awesome. Over here in my world, I do want to celebrate the one thing I got done yesterday before other things went to crap. I'll talk about that in a second. Symfony UX 2.14 is tagged. Woo! As you can see, this actually took a while. 2.13 was way back in December 1st, so it's been a couple, two full months since the last Symfony UX release. We're going to move to a every month release just to get a little bit more predictability. So at the end of January, this is the 2.14 release. At the end of February, we'll get the 2.15 release. And we didn't make it for 2.14, but 2.15, I'm almost positive, is going to be the release for stable live components. I now have a pull request for that. Where is it? It's by me. Going through just the to-dos, and there aren't many to-dos, as you can see here, to get things ready for live components. I talked about that last week, getting it stable, and it's really just about doing the last breaks, the last things that we want to break on live components before we stop breaking things. And we really haven't been breaking things for a long time, but we still technically can break things. So the one thing, and this is what we actually worked on, or we didn't work on it, we brainstormed it last week. So I want to talk about that, is the data action syntax. I had help from all of you to figure out what to do with this syntax. There was two problems. One, we had this data action name in live components, and that I wanted to change that to use the stimulus action parameters. Stimulus has a way for you to pass arguments into an action. So in this case, by saying data action, live action, it's just stimulus, right? We're just calling a method on a live stimulus controller called action, and there's a standard way to pass arguments to that, and it's data live action param. The problem, if you remember from last week, was the arguments to this. I'll go, where am I? There we go. So if you have something like save and you want to pass an argument, like we have a syntax like this, like foobar. The problem was that this wasn't surrounded in quotes. So if people wanted to use, I don't know, like that closing parentheses, it would break because it wasn't a real syntax. And we didn't really want to write a parser for some syntax. That seems really lame. It would be big and in the project, and it just didn't feel right to kind of invent a syntax. So we had brainstormed last week to use a data action param, a stimulus action parameter for each individual argument. So that's actually what this pull request originally looked like. Fortunately, someone from the community kind of came in and poked some holes in that. I won't go into the details, but it had to do with kind of naming and how a stimulus changes kind of has to convert from your attribute name into your actual variable name. So what we ultimately ended on is something I think is pretty cool. We renamed the attribute from data action name to data live action param, so it's using stimulus action parameters. But then for the argument inside, if you have arguments, we were thinking like, what can we do for that? And one idea was to use JavaScript. So you'd have basically something, I'll just put it up here, like this format, ID equals foo, bar equals baz, right? The problem with this is the only way to parse that in JavaScript is to use eval. And if you use eval, then you run into content security policy problems. If this is something you worry about, you know what I'm talking about. If not, you just need to know that some sites use a strong content security policy. Using eval is a big no-no when it comes to CSP. So we can't use that. So what we ended up on is actually query parameters. So the query string this is a syntax that's just global. It's not a syntax that we needed to invent. It's something that already exists. It's something that JavaScript can parse. So when we have ID equals item.id here, it doesn't really look like it, which is cool, but that's a query string. ID equals something. So if you have multiple down here, it's just ID equals, and then the ampersand, then item name equals, and then you just need to URL encode anything that you put into it. And we don't have it right now, but probably makes sense, and we talk about it in this issue, to have some sort of a Twig helper, optional Twig helper, like live action. So save, then you can pass something like ID 5, right? And then it would take care of doing all the URL encoding for you. I've never used my address bar before as a notepad, but here we go. All right. Ooh, celebration from Ryan. In the middle of doing my first PR for Symfony. Wow. So your first, and your first for open source contributing. So doing your first contribution, open source contribution to Symfony's core is pretty hardcore. So congratulations on that. Even I've been around for a long time. I don't have that many commits to Symfony's core. So that is definitely worth celebrating. Hope it's something interesting. It's at least interesting for you. All right, so celebrating here. So UX release is out, and we're almost there to stable. And there's lots of features on the stable release, and you can check it out if you look at the changelog here. But probably the biggest fireworks change is where is it here? Oh, it's right there, yeah. Support for URL binding in live prop. So the idea that you can now, when you have a live prop change, it can actually change your URL. And I thought real quick before we get too far into things that we could try this. So this is the ux.symfony.com code base. I'm going to composer up this to get hopefully the latest version of, the UX code. Awesome. And do I have this up yet? Let's see. Hopefully I'm actually running this in a Symfony Open Local. Am I running a web server? I am. Perfect. Let's go and see. What I want to do here is, right now if I type into this search box and refresh, it goes away, right? That makes sense because the URL isn't changing. And sometimes that's okay, but sometimes it's really something where you want the URL to have a little question mark up here so that when we type, it changes the URL, and when we refresh, right, it pre-populates. So I full disclosure, I haven't actually tried this specific thing yet. It should work though. We released it yesterday. So let's see. I think this component name is called search packages. There it is, search packages.html.twig. There we go. So we have a data model named query. We have our query over here, and we should be able to say URL true. And let's see what happens here. So it's going to, ta-da, look at that. Question mark query equals TUR up in the URL. And importantly, it's not just going to do that, but when we refresh, it pre-populates. So it actually grabs this query from the URL and then passes that into my component. So the component, when the component's mounted on a refresh here, it's actually mounted with that query being passed in. And boy, that just works so well. I am absolutely thrilled by that. It's probably a change we should actually do to the site and deploy, because it's a great way to demo that. So that's the big news on the UX release. The other good news coming from me, hold on, let me check here. Question, I don't know if you've talked about it already, but will the Twig HTML syntax for Symfony Forms be available in the stable version? But yes-ish. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, not specifically the form syntax, but actually I will show you that. Right now we will probably not, I don't know. Yeah, we'll get into that. You'll see that. We'll talk about that. That is basically the core of what we're going to get to today in the meat of things. My last bit of good news is, I don't know if any of you ever played Red Alert as a kid, but and if you did, you may or may not know that people re-implemented it on GitHub. You can just download it and play Red Alert today, and it's the greatest thing ever. I play it with my friends sometimes. My 7-year-old discovered this, or I mentioned this to him, and he started playing it, and it was really cool. And he's really terrible, but you can also dumb down the game. You can handicap the other players. So I can handicap the other team 95%. So basically one of his guys could shoot a tank one time and the tank explodes. So he can play and actually function, and he loved it. And it was just cool for me to see him nerding out at the kitchen table with like his keyboard, and I found a real mouse downstairs so he wouldn't have to use my trackpad, and he's like concentrating, and he's like grouping people together and attacking and creating too many ore trucks, building silos. Really cool stuff. So I don't know, that was my kind of nerdy fun thing from the weekend. All right, question. Are you able to change the name of the parameter, or is it only query? Yep. It's that's a good question. There's a pull request right now. It's basically finished, but we're kind of tweaking the implementation where you can alias it. So your property can be called query, and then your query parameter could be called queue or search or something like that. So not now, but almost definitely in the 2.15 release. That'll happen in about a month. Cool. All right. And I share good news. I also like to share things that messed up over the past week. Rework sucks. It sucks to rework stuff. Right now at SymphonyCasts, we are building out a new way of recording things. We've always recorded the audio for the screencast in the exact same way. I'm basically in a scary closet where I can barely stand up, but the audio is really good and the walls are completely padded, so we get really high quality audio. But we're gonna switch soon to having my face on the video, not for all of the tutorials, but sometimes when I wanna explain something for a minute and there's nothing happening on the screen, it might be a little bit more interesting for me to talk with my hands in front of the screen like this than you just staring at my browser with nothing happening. So we have to change the setup so I can be somewhere that's not in a dark closet where we can have video. So here's what our scary setup looks like right now. Looks like, I don't know, a room where you would interrogate somebody remotely or something. So we have to put shelves back here. We have shelves to put on the wall back here, so it's not so terrible. We also have lighting. But yeah, this is the basic setup, and I'm really excited about it, except that I tried to record audio, and I recorded about 45 minutes of audio for the next screencast, and then I thought it sounded fine, and then we listened to it later, and it doesn't sound fine. So we'll fix that. We just needed to do more work on this room, but that was my big bummer yesterday when I realized a couple hours of work is in the trash. We need to re-record it. So I did some of that this morning, re-recording that in the old setup. We'll get the new setup perfected so we don't ship out bad audio. And yeah, hopefully for the Intro to Symfony 7 course, which will come out really, really soon in the next week or two, we'll have this setup with Ryan, for better or worse, on video a little bit. All right, enough of that. Where are my notes? Let's close Slack there. Cool. All right, follow-ups. Oh yeah, the attribute syntax. That's one other thing that I wanted to mention that we have talked about here on the, that actually we brainstormed. I think this was last week. The weeks are running together. Let's see, this is a PR by Kevin. There we go. We've talked about attributes merging. I'm talking about not live components, really Twig components here. There's two problems with the Twig, not problems isn't the right word, two things that we'd like to improve with the attributes on Twig components. One is the behavior for merging. You know, if you have a class here that's set to default, and you also pass in a class when you render it, what should the behavior be? And the behavior is kind of hard-coded right now. It merges the class and style attributes, all other attributes, it overrides, and there's no way for you to really control that. And there's workarounds, but that's kind of the problem. The second problem, which is a problem I invented, I don't like it, is I don't like that we have this cool HTML syntax, and it's really friendly to designers because it's just HTML. And then once we get inside the components, you have to do this Twiggy thing for your attributes. You know, it's not HTML attributes in that case. So we've kind of went back and forth on this, and we even got some good ideas last week, and so we were kind of iterating on this. And I don't know if we've figured out the final thing, but where is it here? One idea was to do something like this. So I'll actually make that a little bit bigger. Is that working? Yeah. No, it's just making the scroll bar bigger. Sorry, I'm popping all around like a disaster now. That's okay. There we go. Hopefully that's big enough. So the idea is right now you kind of configure the attributes. You kind of say attributes.defaults, and you kind of describe what your defaults are. And then ultimately you just print attributes on the bottom. So the idea is, why don't we make it just a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, a little more direct, like you're just printing stuff. So you'll still have an attributes variable, but if you want to render a class attribute, you actually say attributes.class to print out what the user passed in. And then here you would add whatever custom classes that you have, or not custom classes, whatever default classes you want to have on this component. And then, for example, if you wanted to have a attribute that where you give it a default value, but if the user passes it in, you want it to override, then you would just say something like attributes.get should override. That would kind of fetch you that. I'm missing an empty quote there. Actually, I did this on my phone. You can tell because I have the wrong quote. But you go basically ask the attributes, hey, did the user pass something in for should override? And if they did, print that, else default to whatever our default value is for that. So this is kind of the most complex case here. And then at the bottom, you just print attributes. And what that's going to do is print all the attributes that are remaining. So the implementation of this is a little bit tricky to do correctly because our attributes object becomes mutable. We actually keep track of what's being modified. And sometimes when you try to be clever and keep track of how an object's been modified, you can kind of shoot yourself in the foot later with unexpected things. But I think this is good, and it reminds me a bit of the form component where you have the form_rest function where it will just render whatever fields you haven't rendered. So yeah, you can just take control of what you want on top, and then at the bottom you just print attributes and you get whatever's left, and it's just attributes. So I think the biggest way to shoot yourself in the foot here is if you say class equals foobar, but you forget to do this, then you're going to end up with two class attributes because you're going to end up with the one up here, but then Twig's not going to know that you rendered a class already, so it's going to render a second one when you print the rest of them out. I don't know. I still like it, though. I think this is kind of a cool thing. And Kevin iterated on this a bit more with some ways to kind of potentially have a prepend default, so some helpers to kind of smooth things a little bit, especially if you're using Tailwind merge. So I don't know I don't know what you guys think about that. If it looks good to you, let me know. You can also comment on this issue if you have some ideas. But that is the current status of the attributes project. One kind of rough edge, I think, in Twig Components. And lately, I've been really motivated with Twig Components. It's a totally new idea what we're doing with Twig Components. Not new on the internet, but sort of new to Twig. So we've really been trying to make things really great. If we're gonna have a system where we're putting attributes, let's make it perfect. Like, what's the dream syntax? And let's make that dream syntax work. A little coffee here. Okay, where did I hide my notes? They're just, okay, all the way over in desktop 1. Let's make this big. You can see my very organized desktop over here. I have nothing to hide. You can all see my internal stuff going on. My life is public. It's fine. Cool. So let's talk about this UI recipe stuff. Oh, here we go. Can I use Twig Components without Tailwind? Oh, yeah, you absolutely can. And that's one thing that we should, if we're not making that clear, ask that question, push back on us. I like Tailwind. I want Twig Components to work very well if you're using Tailwind. But yeah, Twig Components don't care what, it's just rendering HTML. It's basically like a fancy include. So in that example, you saw Tailwind merge. We were showing there, if a user is using Tailwind and wants to use this Tailwind merge function, how can we make it possible for them? It's actually not possible right now if a user is using Tailwind and wants to use Tailwind merge. It's not really possible to do it with the current attributes object. We've kind of painted you into a corner. So that's one of the things that we want to fix. All right, so let's talk about this Twig UI recipes thing. So the motivation here is when I talked about this about a month ago on a live stream, so I'll do this quickly, just in case you haven't been around. When I'm working on a project and I need something like tabs, dropdown, modal, tooltip, popover, and 20 other things, these are not things that I want to build by hand. So historically, I've used something like Bootstrap because it gives me some nice styling, and it also gives me the JavaScript behind that. I don't use Bootstrap anymore. There's nothing wrong with using Bootstrap. I've come to the point where it feels a bit heavy of a thing for such simple problems. Really, like tooltips are not, it's not a complex problem. It's something where it closes itself. Same thing with pretty much all these things. They're just really simple things. So I don't want to have a big giant Bootstrap library. Bootstrap also doesn't work super well with Turbo out of the box, which just bothers me. It bothers me that I have to bring this big thing in and then kind of work around it to make it work with Turbo. So what I want instead is just stimulus controllers. If I have a dropdown, I want just a really small stimulus controller that's going to handle that open and close behavior for me. And also, there's going to be a certain set of markup that goes with a dropdown or a modal. And that markup is going to change based on my styling, what my styling looks like on my site. But I still don't want to create it from scratch. I want a starting point, right? I want to go somewhere and, like Bootstrap basically allowed, and say, hey, just give me the HTML that I need for this dropdown, and then I'll tweak it. But just give me the HTML. I don't want to think and create it from scratch. And we all have this problem, and there's a set number of components that really exist in the world. There's a set number of things that we're all doing over and over and over again. So we need a place to share those things. And it really comes down to HTML. What's the HTML for the thing? Tabs, dropdown, modal, whatever. And then what is the JavaScript I need for it? And sometimes you don't need JavaScript. Sometimes the components are just simple components and they don't have any JavaScript. So it's really just about the HTML. But with that HTML, since we have Twig Components, it's also, hey, don't just give me the HTML. Give me the HTML inside of a Twig component. So even with Bootstrap, when you were creating a modal, you had to copy and paste what their modal looked like. There's like a modal body and like a modal content, I think, and a modal footer. So there had to be a certain set of elements and certain classes that went with those. And you had to kind of copy those into your project. And every time you wanted a modal, you had to somehow replicate that, maybe in Twig include or something like that. So Twig Components is a perfect fit for that kind of stuff. So give me that stuff, but give me that HTML inside of a Twig component and give me the JavaScript that I need to run it if I need JavaScript. And also, a lot of times I'll build these things, and I think I do a pretty good job, but then, especially when I put it in a screencast, someone will suggest something a week later that makes it better. And I'm like, oh man, this is great. I'm gonna go incorporate that change into my stimulus controller or my Twig component to make it better, but it's not getting shared out to everybody else. Not everybody is gonna see that comment or something and realize that change can be made. So having that central place where we can get kind of a draft, like a first version of what a great modal UI component looks like, and then someone can say, yeah, but it'd be better if we did this, or there's an easier way to do that, and then we can just iterate on it publicly and not solve those problems over and over and over again. Especially because the web is moving really quickly lately in a good way, and a lot of the ways that we used to solve things, they're just easier ways to do it. And if you watched my last stack tutorial, it was all about building, well, part of it was about building modals, and that was a great example because there's a dialogue element that makes building modals much easier. And it's just almost hard to keep track of that stuff because it just happens really quickly. But if we can all go and look up modal and say, oh, apparently you can do this with a dialogue element and it requires a lot less JavaScript, then we could just see it up there and share it. So there, also, as I mentioned, this idea is not new. It's just new to Twig. So there are a couple of places out there that do something similar, and we're not trying to replace those or reinvent the wheel. Our goal is to have something for Twig users. I'm a Twig, especially a Twig component user. I'm a Twig component user, so I want a place to go where I can get the markup and the JavaScript for the dropdown. It's less about the styling because you're going to tweak the styling. We might give you something that looks nice out of the box, and it will be Tailwind first because we have to choose something. Of course, you could just replace it with your own. You could just replace the classes with your own classes if you want to. So Daisy UI is one place that's really interesting where they have lots of components like this. So drop down, modal, card, collapse count. I mean, this is this kind of stuff we're talking about. So this sort of proves the need for this. And what these are going to give you, let's actually do drop down. That was up here, right? And what these are giving us is just HTML. And actually, in the case of Daisy UI, it also Daisy UI, if you install it, it comes with it's built on Tailwind, but they add their own CSS. So this drop-down class is coming from Tailwind, but they're just kind of giving you the HTML and sometimes the JavaScript needed to solve something. Laravel's community effort on this is really awesome. I'm sure you've heard, inspired by Mary UI, which would integrate so nicely with Daisy UI or even Preline/Flowbyte. Actually, I have not heard about Mary UI. This is exactly why I do this stuff in public. Let's look here. There we go. Yeah. So this is exactly I mean, just reading that. Gorgeous Laravel Blade UI components made for Livewire 3. We won't make it for Livewire. Our version of Livewire is Live Components. These will just be Twig components. If you want to make them live, you can. That's one of the great things about Twig components and Live components, is that they're the same thing. That's a little different than Laravel, where you have, if you want to build something with a Livewire component, it needs to be a full Livewire component, even if you don't need it to be reactive and re-render itself. But yeah, this is exactly kind of the concept of what I'm thinking about. So this is great. I love having other things out there to kind of look and base off of, especially this because it's a server-side language like ours. So awesome. That is great. I'm going to save this so I can kind of study it later. But this is exactly the kind of situation we're talking about. Look at installation here. Okay. Well, I'll look at that later. So I'm not sure that I want to use... so this is specifically for Daisy UI and Tailwind. It's an open question as to how opinionated we want to be on styling. I would like to not be opinionated. I would like to do it with Tailwind, so it looks really nice with Tailwind out of the box, but maybe not Tailwind and Daisy UI, but I do want to use Daisy UI as kind of inspiration. Let's see here. Anyone use Swool or Roadrunner to speed up Symfony app? That's actually something I'll probably live stream about in the future. I have not played with that yet. Cool. Oh, and one of the interesting things about Daisy UI, by the way, is they accomplish a lot of things without JavaScript. So in this case, I actually give two different methods here for dropdowns that are JavaScript free. And they do it either with the details summary elements, which are really cool, or they do it with CSS focus. So just literally something is open because it's focused. I can actually show this if you inspect on the button here. Let's see here. There's the button right there. If I go over to the hover thing here and I hit focus to basically fake it being focused, it opens. So that's actually kind of cool. So that's another thing when we're building these out is there might be spots where we build a stimulus controller and then later we realize we don't need to build the stimulus controller. The other kind of big place that's, oops, that's almost the right website. That's doing this is, why can I not get that? No, I don't want the blog post about it. You can see I've read that blog post before. There we go, is Shad CDN, just a component library. It's made for React, but you can also grab the HTML from it, so it's a really great example of what we're trying to do. Oh yeah, and someone else asked about Shad CDN, so yes, that was on my list as well. So it's cool. It's not a new idea. It's just wrapping up these ideas and just making them really accessible for Twig users. Because right now, if I want to use Daisy UI, right, I still need to go in and kind of take what they have and isolate it into a Twig component. And if it needs JavaScript, I need to create the stimulus controller. Let's just cut through all that. So that's really our focus here, is not to reinvent these things, but to kind of just glue them together and make them in a spot where we can all share them. All right. So let's dive in here. My friend Kevin Bond has been really excited about this idea, as I am. So he started creating something. This is a standalone repository that he created. It's not public yet. And I think this is going to be moved into the ux.symfony.com site eventually. So I think that ultimately the destination for this will be something like this, ux.symfony.com/recipes. But right now it's its own project, and he's already started building out some of these, and they're actually really, really cool. So I'm just going to show you, for example, what it looks like. So here is, oh, and by the way, the word that Kevin's been using is recipes. I don't know what the right word is. We're going to build out more of these and kind of see what they feel like. There might be some cases where what we're actually giving you doesn't involve a Twig component at all. We might just have some stuff up here where we're just telling you, hey, here's a really useful stimulus controller. So in that case, calling these things UI components or something with component in the word doesn't really make sense. So maybe recipes makes more sense. I don't know. We'll can argue about that. So alert, and what we're talking about here is the markup for the alert. So this is what the alert component looks like. You can see it's built out of the box to look good with Tailwind, right? I'm questioning myself now because I'm like, wait, what is this UI-alert? Anyway, here's the components. We have our props that we can pass into there. And, oh, I see. Actually, this comes with custom CSS. Oh, interesting, Kevin. You put custom CSS with this. Oh, but you're using @apply. Okay, we'll talk about that, Kevin. And so this is Tailwind, but it's using @apply with custom CSS. Anyway, here's the result down here. So you get a bunch of demos down here, and these are also closable. So you can see the two things, right? We're getting the UI component that we can just use, and you can see how easy it is to use that UI component down here. And then we also have some JavaScript functionality, which really cool. He says up here that the following recipes are required, the closable recipe. So in fact, actually, this is an example of a recipe where it's just a stimulus controller. There we go. So you can see these kind of building on top of themselves. And this stimulus controller, again, it's something we can iterate on. It's kind of cool because this one's more than just closing. You can close and have it to have a timer, or you can have an auto close with a timer. So there's a couple different things you can have in there. So yeah, so this is a really cool start. So you use those components to do its own site. Yes, I think. So we're going to take basically what you see here, the plan is, and move it to ux.symfony.com. So eventually you'll see this in ux.symfony.com, and you can browse and grab stuff from there, if that answers your question. Those that integrate tightly with Symfony, right, would be really great for stuff such as date picker that I see already, or upload related stuff. Really hype about this. Yes, it would. Well, let's think about that. I think by integrate tightly with Symfony for date picker, you're thinking about having some integration with the form components. And I don't know the answer to that yet. I mean, I think the answer is yes. So there are some cases, most of the time, these UI components are they're standalone. They're just templates. But there are cases where it would be useful to have some Symfony integration, like with the form components. And right now we do that with the Symfony UX Twig. Let me start over. Right now we do that with the UX packages. So I think the answer is yes. When it is useful to have some integration with Symfony itself, like in the case of a date picker and the form component, we need to find a way to do that. I don't know if it's going to be a totally new UX package, or if it's something smaller. I'm not sure. Oh yeah, cookbook is a word we've thought about too. Yeah, it's not a bad word. Cool. Just checking the comments there. All right. Somebody asked about forms. So this is something that I've worked on a little bit, and then Kevin worked on a bunch more. And it's kind of cool, actually. So let me scroll down to the usage here. There we go. So the usage here, and what we're trying to do is give an alternate syntax for the form helpers. Every time we need to customize a form, my front-end designer, which is my wife, needs to customize a form. She'll say something like, hey, I need to add a div around the label with a class on it. And I'm like, whoa, okay, let me set aside my work and come work on this for an hour and like pull apart this form, because it's not friendly. And so the goal here is to just use an HTML syntax. This is actually a pretty detailed example. You don't have to use Twig :form if you don't want to. You could just use a form element. You don't you could just do Twig :form :row, and that's it. And it's going to render the stuff for you. So this is kind of like the example of what it would look like if you were rendering everything manually. But it's nice. Like you can say Twig form label, and it's just kind of override the label. And if you want classes on there, you can add classes. But it's also going to include the ID and the for attribute, all the stuff that you normally need to have. Same thing with the input down here. It's going to include the value. You don't have to worry about that. You just need to worry about the stuff that you are overriding. Even the name here, I think, is done. Oh, sorry. Let me back up here. In this case, we're actually just rendering a normal Twig. We're rendering a form element and form fields without Symfony's form object behind the scenes. So this is just a nice way for us to kind of reuse markup. So for example, we say Twig form label, and the value here is that maybe your label classes, your label elements always have 5 Tailwind classes on them. So you're always going to have your labels look exactly the same. Same thing with your form inputs and your form help. So you're just centralizing that markup, but you're doing it without having to worry about form theming. What's not shown in this example, but what Kevin was also working on, and I'm not going to show, there's a lot of files with this, I'm not going to show those, is you can also use this system with the form component. So in that case, it looks like Twig :form :row, and then I think it's field equals, you can say something like field equals form.name, and then it'll just render. You don't have to have anything after that. It'll just render the entire field for you. And if you do decide to, for example, render things manually, that's where you're not going to need to pass in like the for attribute or the name attributes because it's going to get those things from the form object. So trying to have a system that works both with the form system and without the form system. Cool. And bin console use UX components something command would be nice together with the site. Yes, that's something we've also thought about, and I think that's going to be easy. And I think Kevin has already actually created a bit of a JSON API with this. So yes, we want to be able to have something where you can just install this. Twig recipe install, and then there's like a name like form, Twig recipe install dropdown, and it just copies the stuff in your project. So the intention is not for these things to be packages on their own. I think that's obvious, but I didn't really mention that because you're going to need to customize this stuff. You're going to need to make it your own. But that doesn't mean we can't ship it to you really easily with a command that copies it into your project. I think that would be really cool and very doable. From Yassine, I would dream that recipes are opinionated on the specs, features, semantic markup structure, and leave design as examples. Be it styled, classes, no styles, bootstrap, Tailwind, proposed design, etc. Definitely, well, I think I agree with both of those. I definitely agree with the specs, features, semantic. So for me, what that means, and I think this is what it means for you, is a lot of times when you're building a thing, there are elements or attributes that you're supposed to have. For example, for accessibility. So an example of this is, what is it? Area active tab. Yeah, there we go. So when you're building a tab system, you're supposed to have some attributes on it, like role and area selected for, this would be like the current tab, and then this would be the panel that this is controlling. So, like the ID of the first of the actual content that corresponds with this button. So semantically, yeah, this is something that I think is a really big sell for Twig components because there's so many of these little things and there's small details. And so if you build this by hand, you're not going to take the time to do this, or you're not going to realize that there is some attributes, and it's going to work fine, but it's just not as good as it could be. But if we are sharing these components, then it's just going to be in there. This stuff's you're just going to get this. And this is also something you get from Bootstrap when you copy from their examples, and we can have that as well. As far as the styling, I really want to be able to sell the idea that if you want to get started in Symfony really quickly, you can just grab these things and they're going to look good out of the box. In the same way that Bootstrap, if you copy a Bootstrap modal or a bootstrap button or something, it looks good out of the box. You might want to tweak it. You might want to make it your own, customize it. But I want you to be able to just grab one of these recipes, whatever you call them, and it just looks good. That being said, it doesn't mean that we can't have, for example, a version of each of these that comes without the classes. I don't know if that would be enough, but what I'm basically saying is, we have this class stuff right here. It'd be fairly easy without making the code too messy inside of this recipe system to have the classes have a way basically to view or copy or install this component just without the class stuff. So you're like, look, I want the unstyled version. I'm going to do it myself. So, when you give me this, just don't have a class on there, right? And that's it. We still set up everything else for you, and we just kind of leave it up to you to take care of that part. And I think that would be a reasonable thing to do. Tarmo, have you thought about how to implement screen reader support to those live components? I have not thought about that. Can you tell me more about what you mean by that? I am guilty myself of not always being great about the accessibility kind of stuff. And so there are things in live components that I think we could do better from an accessibility standpoint. That might be kind of what you are referring to. All right. Let's actually, so anyways, we have other ones, tooltips, tabs. This is all good. Let's work on, we have a few minutes here after all my talking. Let's work on a drop-down component for this. I have not actually, Kevin's been doing all the work, so I haven't actually done anything in this project yet, so you get to watch me kind of stumble through this. But really cool thing that he did is he put everything inside of a single file, which is just really neat. So there's a manifest up here, which is YAML, instead of a block manifest. It's just a really cool idea, right? Where you can say what the dependencies are, what the files are that are included in it. I don't know, just really, really neat idea to get this going. And then down here we have the demo. And yeah, that's it. And then I'm pretty sure it just shows, these are the files that it actually shows. So let's work on a tooltip here. Actually, here we go. Ooh, let's see. Yeah, vanilla version is a good idea. Community can then supply bootstrap version if desired, or others. Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Kind of open it up so that say, hey, if you want bootstrap version, come contribute it. And talking about when you're doing some search and UI changes, you need to tell that somehow to the user. I've done a lot of that kind of stuff in the current project. I would love to know more about the requirements for that. And that's something that in live components we probably can't do for you because you're writing your own custom HTML. But we could definitely recommend it and show it in the examples. We definitely don't show any of those things in the examples right now. Something that we can do in live components that we don't currently do is when a live component is re-rendering, there's a attribute for that indicates to screen readers that, hey, this area of the page is actually working, it's busy, and then after the loading's done, it goes away. That's not something we do on live components right now. It's something that we should add. It'd be really easy to add. As a bonus, you can also use that for styling, especially if you use Tailwind. We have built-in things with live components to add loading behavior, but in the normal majority of the cases, it's not actually needed. If we added area busy true, then you could style this or style things inside of this based on that attribute being there or not. You could just use that for loading. It'd be kind of less that you would need to do, less live components specific stuff. All right. So let's copy this and let's do a drop down. Cool. Don't ask again. No. I'll work on making this better later. So we don't need, right now I don't know of any recipes that we need. You will need Twig UX component. Yeah, you've seen a demo from HTMX that uses area busy. It's really convenient. I use it a lot with Turbo since Turbo adds an area busy attribute to Turbo frames. Just super, super easy. And yeah, the area, or aria, those attributes are they're there for accessibility, but there's a bit of a carrot. There's a bit of a benefit to using them because you can use them for styling, which is really convenient also. All right, let's just start with a component called dropdown and references. I don't know, let's start really simple, and let's build the one from Daisy UI. One of the other things I don't know, and Daisy UI doesn't really make it obvious either, is they kind of say method 1, using details and summary tags. Okay, and that seems to work really nicely. And then below it says method 2, using CSS focus. So it's like, okay, which one should I use? Are there pros and cons? Or there's a method 3 also, which is using JavaScript. And I don't know, they might be equivalent. Maybe some people know that maybe there's some limitations to one. I have no idea. But those are the kind of things where if we build this out in public, we can figure that out. And let's go build our component then. So new file, dropdown.html.twig, and we'll be real. Let's use this one. Let's use the details one to get us started. And another advantage of doing all of this is there's so many sources. Even on this, we were looking at Shad CDN. Somebody told me about the Laravel version that they're working on for this. So we can kind of, instead of having 10 different places to go, we can kind of do our best to boil this down to kind of the one good option, or the one option that we think is the best that will cover 90% of the use cases. All right. Hey, there we go. The live streaming has caused me to realize how bad I am at typing, not just from making mistakes, but I look down at the keyboard a lot. You see me like this? I'm like, what am I doing? Is this my first time using a keyboard? Ooh, and this is actually interesting because dropdown is going to be a Daisy thing, and I don't actually want to use Daisy UI. So, but we can actually do a little reverse engineering here. So the dropdown here is position relative and display inline block. So we can actually change that to normal Tailwind classes. So Tailwind is installed on this project, and then inline block. Cool. The button class, same thing. That is not actually a, oh, there's all kinds of stuff on that one. So that one might be where, geez Louise. Oh, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to blush seeing all that stuff on there. I'm going to leave that for now. A bunch of these might actually just be the same thing. Like, see, there's like a border. I'm not sure on the timing. Some of these, we have a bunch of CSS properties here. Some of these might actually be wrapped up all into a single class, like padding left 1 rem and padding right 1 rem. That's going to be a single Tailwind class. That's going to be like basically for padding X, Y, or for padding X certain. So it'd be like something like PX4, I think. So I'm going to save that for later. And this one is a drop-down content. That same thing. Yeah, I'm going to have to work on translating that. But this is where I would like to not have to bring in. Yeah, that's true. Flowbyte might be better at capture styling. I just didn't want to use the Flowbyte. I was trying to do it without JavaScript. Let's see here. A lot of developers struggle with typing. You're not alone. Yeah. Preline is underrated. I don't know preline. Maybe you're right. Maybe we should go to Flowbyte for now. But I would like to get a version, if possible, that does not require JavaScript. I'm pretty sure that their version requires JavaScript. All right, let's start over here. So there's the button. Okay, cool. Awesome. We don't technically need it for a Twig component, but we do need a root component. So this is one thing which gets a little bit weird sometimes, but it hasn't actually caused any real problems in my project. Just kind of requiring that root component to go around those two things. Attributes. And let's see here. Let's get rid of this. And I'm going to get rid of some other stuff here in a second. This is related to the JavaScript functionality with Flowbyte, which I don't want to use. Oh, use their styling and Daisy's method. That's okay. I understand. That's actually a good idea. And maybe I don't care about the styling that much. Hold on. I'm jumping around. Live coding here. All All right, the only tricky thing with that, Kevin, is this drop-down content, because we have to do the drop-down is type of thing. Let's see here. Is not details. Oh, you know what? Actually, I think this might just be for the version that doesn't use the details. So I think we might be okay. Let's just try this and see what happens. All right, so let's go down here and do a demo. Drop down. There's no. Oh, I'm going to need the content. So this is where I'm going to put my block content. Where we get one kind of free block in here. So we want to put this, use this wherever it's most likely we need to use content. I'm going to remove this drop down content class that's not doing anything. And actually, there we go. All right, boom, let's try that. Get out of here, AI, trying to type crazy things. Ta-da! Look at that. Thanks to Kevin, it automatically finds my drop down and does it. Let's see here. Having at least an option with markup with unstyled classes that helps targeting semantic elements where the HTML or attributes are not enough for custom styles, and I'd be happy enough. Awesome. Cool, cool, cool. So we can just rip out all the classes. Talking about a necessary root element, have you thought about a teleport utility, kind of like Vue does, would be pretty useful? Yeah, yes and no. And so by teleport, what that functionality is the ability to render something inside of a Twig component, or yeah, Twig Components. It'd be something like, I don't know, I'm making this up, but so you render this on the page somewhere, and it actually takes this and moves it somewhere else. And oftentimes this is done so that you can render yourself outside of the rest of your DOM elements, so you can solve z-index problems. So for example, a flash or a modal. And so if you have a flash and you render a flash like right here in the middle of the page, and you want it to appear on top of everything else, you'll try to set a high z-index on it. But if you're already inside of an element with too low of a z-index, then you can't go above your parent and it causes problems. However, I think there are other solutions for that now. I think we'll see, and I'm not against building it if we can be proven wrong. But I don't think we have that problem anymore, and the reason is that there are now semantic elements for doing those types of things. So for example, with a modal, there is now the dialog element. The dialog element is going to pop on top of everything else no matter where it is. It doesn't need to be teleported somewhere else. And for flash notifications, there is the, there's a new one, is it popover? Yeah, and I think, I'm not actually sure if this is appropriate, if this is what we need for the flash or not, but this is another one where it's just like it's built in and it's meant to pop over stuff, so we don't need to teleport it. So we'll see if I'm proven wrong on that, but right now this is one of those cool things where it's like, hey, do you have teleport? And it's like, no, because I think we can find another solution that's just native to browsers, and isn't that really cool? It's just a one less complex thing that you have to worry about. On popover attributes. One second. Pop. I was talking about a popover. Oh, it's an attribute. I didn't even realize it was an attribute. See, somebody on my team, Vladimir, just told me about this the other day. I didn't even realize. Yeah, look, it's an attribute, not a. I was thinking this was an element, like the dialog element. So yeah, that's awesome. Love it. So if you display a flash message from an action and re-render that component, the previous flash would disappear. Let's see here. Oh, I've had another problem. I don't know if teleporting would fix that, or maybe Turbo 8 kind of. But for example, if I display a flash message from an action and re-render that component, that previous flash would disappear. Oh, I understand the problem. Yeah, because you would render a flash right here, and then you pop that up in the top of your page, and it looks nice, and everyone's happy. But then as it's up there, the user continues interacting with your live component, so it re-renders again, but this time it re-renders without the flash, and it goes away. That is a good question. I'll have to think about that. I think that's I still don't want to teleport it out. It still feels like a workaround. But one other kind of missing feature of live components right now is the ability to do forever pagination, kind of forever scroll. So, right, you have you show 10 items, and when you scroll to the bottom, your live component re-renders itself to show items 11 through 20. So the problem is that the first time your component renders, you render 1 through 10, and then when you scroll down, you can trigger a live action. You change page to 2, right? And now you render results 11 through 20, but you're now rendering only 11 through 20, which means 1 through 10 disappear. And it's not actually what you wanted. So we might be circling around a feature where there needs to be a way to preserve things, to render with some attribute around an element that says, when my component re-renders, this is kind of permanent. I want you to preserve this. And there could be some pitfalls there where, I want to preserve this, but then later you decide you also need a way to override that. I don't know. Some sort of preserve or permanent thing. And then you can use that with your Flash messages, because you could just say, hey, don't override this. Just keep this element forever. So that might be a solution. That's all right. I like the questions. All right. So let's go back over here and check this out. And let's go to drop down. Cool. It already looks good. It probably won't work. Oh. Haha. And if that was not what you expected it to look like, me either, but duh, of course it's what it's going to look like. This is what the details and summary looks like. This is just how your browser styles things. So it's just styling it kind of like it's supposed to. So really, it's kind of working. I mean, it is working, but it's not quite what we want. Let me go up here and get, let's see, the drop down content button. I think what we really need to do is just, it's just going to be coming out to grabbing the styling. So this BTN is going to, I'm guessing this BTN is what's getting rid of that arrow here. So I'm not going to do this right now because this is just going to be a chore of styling. I'll probably honestly use a little bit of AI for this to basically grab this stuff here and then translate that into Tailwind, pop the Tailwind in there, and then we should be good. And yeah, this one's almost extra easy because we don't even need a stimulus controller for it. So while we're here, I'm going to bootstrap one more. I have a couple of minutes left. So you like that preserving things idea. By the way, on the topic of teleporting, as I mentioned, I'm going to try not to add teleporting because hopefully we don't need it. But one reminder, if you use Turbo, so let's pretend this is a live component and something just happened and we need to do something custom on the page. If you're using Turbo, then you can always just add a Turbo stream at the bottom. Let's see here. Target equals, I don't know, header. Action equals replace. Or, let's do a little more realistic. Header count. There we go. So if you have Turbo installed, you can just randomly put Turbo streams wherever you want. So when I re-render, this would be surrounded by some sort of an if condition, like, if is saved, right? We just saved something on our components, and now we realize that because of that, we need to update some count that's in our header. So you're just going to have something like this in there. And then maybe this is to make it a little more realistic, right? It's count. So yeah, you can just pop these on the page. This is going to render onto the page, and it's going to find the header underscore count ID element on your page. It's going to replace it with this content, and that's it. And Turbo streams actually disappear after they're processed. So it'll be on the page. Live component will re-render. It'll be on the page for 1 millisecond. The Turbo stream will activate. It'll replace the header count div with this div, and it'll remove itself. So almost better than teleporting. Because it can do more than just teleporting. It can replace elements, update elements, remove elements, whereas teleporting is just kind of take this and move it somewhere else. Turbo streams, you can do a lot more. So highly recommend leveraging this solution if you have it. And if you are not using Turbo, remember, you can always just pop Turbo into your project. If you're not really ready to use Turbo fully because of your JavaScript, you can turn Turbo Drive off. If you do that, then nothing happens. So you can install Turbo, tell Turbo Drive to go off, and that means nothing happens, but you're now free to start using Turbo, like things like Turbo Streams. So that's a great way of doing it. Let's see here. Also, drop-down component is really hard just because you might want to use option groups, search, multi-select, etc. That is, I think, you're right about that. Yeah, and that might actually be, correct me if I'm wrong, what is known more as a combo box. And that is something that we are going to need. So this is, I think drop down, the intention is you click it. It's like a menu item, right? And I think what you're talking about is combo box where, actually, I think Daisy has a combo box. Somebody has a combo box. I guess I should actually use their search. No, they don't, or they call it by something different. Sometimes it's called a list box. And yeah, this is like one of my problems that I want to solve because they're box. Where is it? See, even I do this stuff. I can't remember where these things are. List box. Yeah, I can't remember. But it's kind of like the autocomplete component, but just a lot more flexible and cooler. Yeah, Tom Select, exactly. Tom Select is a combo box. It is a kind of combo box, but it's kind of baked in. It's a bit like, here's your combo box, and you can configure it, but you can't really control the markup, and so you're sort of ultimately limited by what they are. So what I would like to have is a way, and actually somebody on the Ruby on Rails community is building something right now, which hopefully they'll share. Something where you just provide the markup. So you provide what you want your combo box to look like, and then it kind of hooks up to your select element. So you have this, whatever kind of experience you want. Headless UI is probably, yeah, that's exactly, you see it auto-completed it as combo box there. This is exactly where I was looking at the combo box. So here's my combo box here. And yeah, and then you can make it look a million different ways based on, groups or, having this hook up with Ajax or not hooking up with Ajax. And yeah, this is something we definitely want to solve. Yeah, and from Delios, I usually use live component events for that, but that requires having that component inside a Turbo or a TC. Twig component, Turbo is really cool. Yeah. Don't forget about Turbo. All right, I started creating a modal. I want to do that later. This would be a version of what I did in my last stack tutorial anyway. So I'm going to end it here and then get to work on actually finishing this dropdown with some proper styling examples. And yeah, thanks as always for joining me. Thanks for the questions. This is really great. Next week we'll do this again. I don't know what we're going to do. We might do more of this. We might do something totally different. I have to think about it. If you have any ideas, let me know. But I really want to build this out. This is kind of one of the things I'm focusing on for February is getting this stuff built out so we can start sharing this stuff. And the cool thing is, because it's not a package, we don't need to get it perfect on the first try. We just need to get it up there so that all of us, and it's happened in this conversation, can say, hey, didn't you know you're supposed to have an area attribute on there? Or didn't you know there's this other easier way to do this? Or didn't you know about this other UI components place that has a better way of doing it? And we can just say, oh, okay, cool. And we'll just bring it in. So I want to get this up kind of as quickly as possible, but I want it to be polished so it looks nice and right marketing, right? We want it to make a bit of a splash when it comes out, that there's this really cool thing we have. But I'm really excited to just start iterating on this stuff. It's an exciting time around here. And there's other stuff going on in the UI, UX world as well, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, that's it. Everyone have a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you out on the internet. I feel like I need a closing tagline, or would that be too cheesy? Anyways, I don't have anything cool to say. So see ya, everybody. Thanks for hanging out.